Welcome to Diplomacy in International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. This deep dive, well, it's a little different. Um, it's been generated with the help of AI, but Bastian has personally fact-checked every detail, so no worries there. Think of it as your personalized briefing on the world. We're kicking off a mini-series. It's a fascinating topic. I know will be great for anyone interested in international relations and, of course, Danish politics, war and peace in the modern world. And the question we'll grapple with throughout this series is one that I think is on a lot of our minds these days. Is peace even possible anymore?
That's a great question to kick things off with.
That's
To
right.
really unpack it, though, I think we need to first re-examine what we even mean by peace.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I mean, obviously we can all point to wars happening right now,
Yeah.
but the world has generally avoided another World War II, right? So what's wrong with our current understanding of peace?
Yeah, well, the problem is that our focus on preventing war between nations, which was a huge achievement of the post-World War II era. By the way, it's blinded us to other forms of violence and conflict that are just as devastating. We've created this artificial separation between war and peace, when in reality, things are much more fluid and interconnected.
So are you saying there's no such thing as peace? That we're always at war in some way?
Not necessarily, but to understand this better, I think it helps to shift our focus away from these abstract definitions and zoom in on a very specific image. Imagine Aleppo in 2016. Children are rolling burning tires through the besieged city. They're trying to create a smoke screen to obscure themselves from Russian airstrikes.
Wow, yeah, that's a powerful image. It really highlights the human cost of war, even when it's fought with advanced technology. You'd think tire smoke wouldn't do much against modern weaponry.
You'd be right. Those tire fires wouldn't have stopped guided bombs or indiscriminate bombing, which were commonplace in the Syrian civil war. But the image is still important because it reveals a deeper truth about the nature of conflict today. Even in a situation that feels almost medieval with children burning tires, we see the influence of global politics and sophisticated military technology. The Syrian conflict, while it was rooted in internal tensions, became a proxy war with countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the US, all involved, each pursuing their own agendas.
And this had ripple effects far beyond Syria, right? We saw the refugee crisis impacting European politics, the rise of ISIS, and shifts in global power dynamics. It's like a conflict in one corner of the world can suddenly be at our doorstep.
Exactly. And this brings us to a crucial point. While we've largely avoided direct conflict between major powers since World War II, Western nations have been involved in almost constant warfare in other parts of the world. These conflicts, they might not fit our traditional definition of war, but they are just as real and just as deadly.
So the narrative of peace that we've been telling ourselves doesn't quite match the reality on the ground. We're almost constantly at war, just not always in ways that we easily recognize.
Precisely, and this is where the concept of internationalized conflict comes in. It describes situations where external powers get involved in conflicts within other states, often blurring the lines between what is a domestic issue and what is an international one. A prime example is the 2014 conflict in Ukraine. Russian involvement in the conflict, while never formally declared as a war, had devastating consequences, including the downing of MH17, a civilian airliner.
That's a chilling example. It really drives home the point that even when traditional war isn't declared, the risks are very real.
And this growing unease, this feeling that things aren't as peaceful as we'd like to believe, isn't unfounded. The current global system, built largely on the UN Charter's principle of outlying interstate war, has been remarkably successful in preventing another World War II. But it's struggling to keep up with the changing nature of conflict in the 21st century.
So if the old ways of defining peace are failing us, where do we go from here? How do we even begin to rethink these concepts in a way that's relevant to the world we live in today?
That's the core question we need to address. And to do that, we need to dive deeper into the limitations of the current peace framework and explore why, even with the best of intentions, our pursuit of peace often seems to create more conflict.
Okay, I'm ready to go deeper. Where do we start?
Let's look at how the very systems designed to maintain peace-like interventions in places like Iraq often contribute to the very violence they're meant to stop.
That sounds like a recipe for frustration, if not outright disaster.
Exactly. And it highlights a crucial point. We haven't just failed to achieve lasting peace, we've often misunderstood the very nature of conflict itself.
This is where I imagine many of our listeners, especially those interested in Danish politics, are wondering, what does this all mean for Denmark? How do these global shifts impact our security and role in the world? We'll explore those questions further in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, you've hit on a really crucial point there. How do these seemingly distant conflicts and the changing nature of war impact a country like Denmark. It's easy to think, well, that's happening over there, it doesn't affect us, but the reality is much more interconnected.
Right. And I think a lot of listeners, especially those following Danish politics, are grappling with that very question. We're seeing debates about defense spending, our role in NATO, and the impact of global events on things like migration and the economy. It feels like the world is getting smaller, and the lines between over there and here at home are blurring.
Absolutely. And to navigate this new landscape, we need to understand the limitations of the traditional peace framework, especially the idea that intervening in conflicts will automatically lead to peace. The Iraq War, for example, was launched with the stated goal of bringing peace and democracy to the region, but the long-term consequences have been anything but peaceful.
Yeah, the irony is almost palpable. The pursuit of peace through military intervention often creates more instability and violence. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
A very apt analogy. The Iraq War is a stark reminder that military solutions, while sometimes necessary, rarely address the root causes of conflict. In fact, they often exacerbate existing tensions and create new ones. We saw this not only in the devastating civilian toll, but also in the rise of sectarian violence and the emergence of groups like ISIS.
So if military intervention isn't the answer, what is? Are we just supposed to stand by and watch as conflicts erupt and atrocities occur?
Of course not, but we need to move beyond simplistic solutions and recognize that lasting peace requires a multifaceted approach. It's not just about ending violence, it's about addressing the underlying causes of conflict, things like poverty, inequality, political oppression, and resource scarcity.
That makes sense, but it also feels incredibly daunting. Where do we even begin to tackle such complex, interconnected issues?
Well, it starts with a shift in mindset, I think. We need to move away from a purely state-centric view of the world where nations are the primary actors and recognize the growing influence of non-state actors like terrorist organizations or even multinational corporations.
You're highlighting how technological advancements, particularly in areas like cyber warfare, have empowered these non-state actors, making them capable of inflicting significant damage even on powerful nations.
Exactly. Think about it. A group with limited resources can launch a cyber attack that cripples a country's infrastructure or steals sensitive data, potentially triggering a real-world conflict. This blurring of the lines between the physical and digital realms is a game changer.
It feels like we're constantly playing catch-up, trying to adapt to these new threats, while still grappling with the old ones. It can be overwhelming.
It is, but I think there are reasons for hope. We are at least becoming aware of these challenges, which is the first step towards finding solutions.
Okay, so awareness is key. But what comes next? What concrete steps can we take to move towards a more peaceful and secure world?
Well, as we've discussed, relying solely on military might is no longer sufficient. We need to invest in diplomacy, conflict prevention, and peace-building initiatives. This requires a shift in priorities both in terms of funding and political will.
So instead of just reacting to crises, we need to be more proactive in preventing them.
Precisely, think of it like healthcare. It's much more effective and ultimately less costly to prevent diseases than to treat them once they've taken hold. The same principle applies to conflict by addressing the root causes and investing in early warning systems and conflict mediation. We can prevent many conflicts from escalating into full-blown wars.
This all makes sense, but it requires a level of international cooperation that often feels elusive, especially in today's world, where political polarization and nationalism are on the rise.
You're absolutely right, and that's where the role of international institutions becomes crucial. Organizations like the United Nations were created in the aftermath of World War II to prevent another global catastrophe. But the world has changed dramatically in the past 70 years, and these institutions need to adapt to keep pace with the new realities.
So we need to update the operating system, so to speak, to deal with the current challenges. But how do we do that when global cooperation seems increasingly fragile?
It's a difficult task, no doubt, but it's not impossible. We need to start by recognizing that these challenges transcend national boundaries. Climate change, pandemics, cyber threats, economic instability. These are global problems that require global solutions.
So even though it feels like the world is becoming more fragmented, we're actually becoming more interconnected.
Exactly, and this interconnectedness, while it presents challenges, also creates opportunities for cooperation. We have shared interests, shared vulnerabilities, and a shared responsibility to create a more peaceful and sustainable future.
That's a hopeful message, but it also begs the question, how do we translate this recognition of shared responsibility into concrete action?
That's the million-dollar question, and while there are no easy answers, I believe that a key part of the solution lies in empowering individuals and communities to become active agents of change.
This brings us back to the question many of our listeners are likely pondering. What can we as individuals do to make a difference? Especially here in Denmark, where we might feel somewhat removed from the front lines of global conflict. We'll explore those very questions after a short break. Okay, so we're back, and I think a lot of our listeners, those who are deeply engaged with Danish politics, might be feeling a little overwhelmed at this point. We've talked about huge global shifts in conflict, the limitations of traditional peacekeeping, the need for new approaches. But what does that actually look like for us here in Denmark? What can we as individuals even do to contribute to a more peaceful world?
Yeah, that feeling of being overwhelmed is understandable, but it's important to remember that even small actions can have a ripple effect. It starts with recognizing that peace isn't just something that happens out there. It's something we actively build both in our own communities and on a global scale.
So instead of feeling powerless, we can actually be empowered to make a difference. Yeah, give me some examples. What are some things that people can actually do?
Well, for those interested in Danish politics, there's a lot of room for engagement. Stay informed about Denmark's foreign policy decisions, engage with your elected officials, advocate for policies that prioritize diplomacy, conflict prevention, and sustainable development. Remember, Denmark has a long tradition of peacekeeping and humanitarian aid. Those are values worth upholding and strengthening.
That's a great point. We often think of peace building as something that happens in far-off countries, but our political choices here at home have a direct impact on global affairs.
Exactly. And beyond the political sphere, there are tons of ways to contribute to a more peaceful world. Supporting organizations working in conflict zones, promoting intercultural understanding, even simply having open and honest conversations about these issues within your own social circles. All of that can plant the seeds for change.
I love that idea of planting seeds. It reminds us that creating a more peaceful world is a long-term project, and that even small acts of kindness and understanding can contribute to that larger goal.
Absolutely. And let's not underestimate the power of education either, right? The more we understand about the root causes of conflict, the better equipped we are to find solutions. Read books, listen to podcasts, attend lectures. There's a wealth of information out there waiting to be explored.
I think that's one of the things I appreciate most about this deep dive. It's sparking curiosity and encouraging listeners to continue their own exploration of these complex topics.
That's the goal, because ultimately the quest for peace is not about finding easy answers or quick fixes. It's about cultivating a mindset of critical thinking, empathy, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for guiding us through this thought-provoking exploration of war and peace in the 21st century. You've given us a lot to consider and a lot to be hopeful for.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, even though the challenges we face are daunting, we have the power to shape a better future. It starts with each of us right here, right now.
Powerful words to end on. And for our listeners, as you continue your own deep dive into these crucial issues, we'll leave you with this question. If traditional notions of war and peace are failing us, what new concepts and approaches do you think are needed to navigate the complexities of the world today? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving for a more peaceful future. Until next time.